"You can't do this to me. I'm the hoe." Karen shrieked like a banshee with a law degree, standing in $600 0 cents heels on the courthouse steps, mascara melting, waving a shattered gavel like it was an Excalibur. The sheriff didn't flinch. Behind him, movers boxed up her wine fridge, and 42 throw pillows marked "Live, Laugh, Litigate." 10 months earlier, she forged documents to steal Wyatt Granger's ranch. Today, she got evicted from land she never legally owned. And why? He was already carving a new sign: "Freedom Fields, no HOA allowed." It was a Tuesday, sun barely up, sky still hung over from last night's stars, and there I was, Wyatt Granger, knee-deep in mud and callipines and checking the southern troughs, when I saw Jim Rawlins, our local postman and full-time gossip mule, kick up a trail of dust in his wheezing blue truck. He pulled up like he was delivering a bomb, not mail, and waved an envelope at me like it had teeth. I wiped my hands on my jeans, muttered a greeting, and took it. Now, I'm not a man who scares easy, but the look on Jim's face gave me pause. I figured it was some political junk or another, county permit form trying to convince me that my barn needed an emissions inspection. Instead, it was a foreclosure notice from the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Apparently, I had failed to pay several maintenance fees over the past year, and as a result, they had legally seized and auctioned off my 150-acre family ranch to developers. Sold, signed, gone. I stood there in my boots trying to blink the absurdity out of my eyes. Maintenance fees? Auctioned? HOA? My ranch had been here since President Taft had a waistline. We'd never been part of any HOA. Hell, we were here before the Willow Creek Estates even existed, back when the land was still wild, before every hill was subdivided into golf cart-width driveways and chemically green lawns. I flipped the letter over, hoping it had some kind of hidden punchline on the back. Nope, just more legalese in fonts so smug they may as well have been printed in Karen speak. The mailing address listed on the warnings? Some random box in the next county over. Not my house, not even my zip code. They hadn't just mailed it wrong, they had deliberately mailed it wrong. And when I didn't respond, they voted in a private HOA meeting, one conveniently unannounced to the public, to repossess the land, and guess who bought most of it? The board members. At a discounted rate, in cash. Karen Brockton, HOA president and spiritual leader of the beige cult, now owned the creek that watered my cattle. Todd Branner, vice president and full-time smug mustache, grabbed the north pasture where my granddaddy's ashes were buried under a cottonwood. Even their secretary snagged a chunk with the barn still standing on it. The land had been diced and divided like a brisket at a Baptist potluck. I dropped to sit on the wheel well of my truck, paper trembling in my hand. Rage didn't even cover it. My family had worked this land for generations. My calluses were built from this dirt. My bones would end up in it. And now some HOA clipboard mafia thought they could just take it because I didn't pay for a sidewalk I never asked for? The cows didn't seem to notice. One licked the rearview mirror like it owed her money. But I noticed. I noticed everything. And as I stared out across the pastures being parceled into future patios, something older than anger settled in my chest. Not just fury, purpose. They didn't just steal my land, they woke it up, and now it was coming for them. Back when Wyatt Granger was just a name on a dusty mailbox, and not the man personally responsible for the HOA's collective blood pressure spike, I did something only a fool or a man with nothing left to lose would do. I called Harlan. Old school lawyer, smelled like bourbon and leather-bound regrets. He was the kind of man who filed paperwork with a pocket knife and still wore suspenders unironically. The moment he heard Willow Creek HOA, he chuckled like someone had just handed him a crossword puzzle labeled idiots. We met in his office, which looked less like a legal practice and more like a taxidermist's garage. He didn't ask how I was. He just handed me a stack of manila folders and said, "Start digging." I spent hours flipping through records, deeds, maps, old surveys, yellowed like dried tobacco until we hit pay dirt. Or more accurately, Harlan did. "This," he said, tapping a brittle parchment with his finger, "is a covenant, 1910, filed by your great-granddaddy, signed with ink and spike. It was a land covenant, legally binding and sneakier than a rattlesnake in tall grass. It declared that no portion of the original Granger Ranch could be subdivided, sold, or repurposed without the written, notarized consent of a direct descendant. And there it was, my name, Wyatt Granger. Current title holder and stubborn bloodline and residence. Turns out their dream homes were built on a sleeping clause. The kind of clause that doesn't knock, it breaks the door off the hinges. Now, most HOA boards wouldn't get caught dead trying to fake their way around something like that. But this wasn't most boards. This was Karen Brockton's HOA. The same woman who once fined me $200, 0 cents, because one of my hens had a destructive feather pattern. She said it didn't align with the visual harmony of Willow Creek. I told her the hen didn't take fashion advice from people who wore rhinestone visors to council meetings. But this covenant, this was more than a hen dispute. This was the legal equivalent of a Molotov cocktail wrapped in a notarized bow. Harlan leaned back, folded his hands across his gut, and said the words that made my spine straighten like a fence post in fresh cement. They didn't just trespass. They triggered a reversion. That meant the second they started dividing that land without my permission, it legally bounced back to me. Every parcel, every post, every strip of overpriced sidewalk and faux Victorian mailbox. I owned it all, at least on paper. Getting it back in reality, that was going to take grit, lawyers, and just the right kind of psychological warfare. I stepped out of Harlan's office that day with a file under my arm and something dangerous in my chest, calm. Not the kind that comes with peace, but the kind that comes before a thunderstorm. They thought I'd roll over because they had clipboards and laminated newsletters. If they thought I'd go down with a fence post, they were about to see what barbed wire justice looks like. Wyatt didn't come back swinging. He came back quietly with an accountant, 4 shell companies, and a smile that meant war. First came Prairie Holdings, LLC, registered in a neighboring state under a generic-sounding trust fund, then Wild Mesa Development, Dust Creek Properties, and Flatland Equity. Each one clean, each one distant, each one designed to look like a bored out-of-state investor looking for suburban flips. No cowboy boots, no cattle talk, no trace of Wyatt Granger. Within 3 months, the plan was in motion. The housing market in Willow Creek had started to sputter. Folks were worn down by Karen's endless violation notices, surprise beautification fees, and that one winter where she tried to ban snowmen because they weren't architecturally consistent. People were tired, broke, and looking for an exit. Wyatt gave them one. One foreclosure here, one quiet divorce there, and just like that, Prairie Holdings snagged its first house. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, one wildly unnecessary outdoor fountain. Karen sent a welcome basket to the new owners, who happened to be 2 retired teachers. On paper, in reality, they were Wyatt's cousin and her wife, both perfectly happy to mow the lawn and smile politely while Karen delivered monthly newsletters that went straight into their fireplace. Next, Wild Mesa picked up a house that had sat empty since Karen fined the owners into oblivion for having an aggressively patriotic flag angle. Yep, she evicted a veteran family because their American flagpole was tilted 3 degrees too far west. Wyatt bought that house the next day, full cash, no inspection. And just to be petty, he replaced the pole with a brand new one, laser aligned, and flew the flag 24/7 under a spotlight. HOA tried to complain. The local paper ran the story. Public opinion, not in their favor. Meanwhile, the HOA board was busy throwing wine and cheese mixers to welcome what they thought was a wave of young investors. Karen called it a revitalized era for Willow Creek. Todd, her ever-loyal vice president, toasted the board with a plastic flute of sparkling cider and declared, "We're entering the golden age of this neighborhood." The same neighborhood Wyatt was now quietly buying peace by overpriced peace. He didn't show up to meetings, didn't vote, didn't cause a fuss. His shell companies did all the talking. Houses were kept pristine, lawns trimmed, blinds coordinated, fences HOA-approved beige, but they never participated. Never donated to Karen's pet fountain project, never attended HOA picnics, just paid their dues on time and stayed perfectly quiet. The illusion held for a while. Karen praised the new blood moving in, blissfully unaware she was praising the man she once accused of weaponizing poultry aesthetics. Every acquisition came with a paper trail long enough to make any audit weep, but never once led back to Wyatt. It was surgical, and it was devastating. By the time the HOA held their spring gala, complete with a slideshow celebrating investor engagement metrics, Wyatt owned 11 homes outright. That's right, 11, 1/3 of Willow Creek. Every mortgage, every mailbox, every manicured hedge under his silent control. And Karen, she was too busy congratulating herself on revitalizing the community to see that she was standing on a chessboard 5 moves from checkmate. They thought they were hosting a party. They didn't realize they were dancing in a house he already owned. Wyatt didn't just want the land back. He wanted the system that stole it to collapse under its own weight, and he was about to drop the final brick. It happened quietly through paperwork, proxies, and perfectly timed acquisitions. By month 18, Wyatt's companies legally owned 64% of all the parcels in Willow Creek. They gave him what HOA nerds call a supermajority, the magical threshold where you can rewrite the rules, dissolve the board, and declare Tuesdays no clipboards allowed day if you really want. Karen had no idea. She was too busy issuing fines for non-regulation wind chimes and bragging about a new HOA-sponsored initiative to paint every mailbox the same emotionally dead shade of taupe. But Wyatt, he was done playing ghost. It was time to haunt them properly. The board had scheduled a closed strategic meeting in their beige little community clubhouse, same one they once used to vote on foreclosing his family ranch. Wyatt walked in like he owned the place, because, well, technically he did. Clipboard Karen nearly choked on her lemon water when she saw him step through the double doors in his worn denim jacket and boots that still smelled faintly of saddle soap. "You can't be here," she snapped, reaching for her gavel like it was a holy relic. "This is a closed session for HOA board members only." Wyatt just smiled and pulled out the HOA charter. "Yes, they're charters," and flipped to Article 4, Section C. "Any member representing more than 50% of total community lots may call or attend a board meeting at any time." He laid the stack of property titles on the polished oak table with a thud so satisfying it could have been its own soundtrack. "I'm not attending," he said. "I'm chair." Karen blinked. This has to be a mistake," she stammered. "We've never approved any of these transactions." "You didn't need to," Wyatt interrupted. "See, I followed the rules. I paid the dues. I just didn't worship at the altar of passive-aggressive landscaping notes." Todd tried to whisper something about calling legal counsel, but his voice cracked halfway through like a teenager caught shoplifting. One by one, the board members began flipping through the documents, watching their kingdom dissolve under signatures and purchase agreements. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole, and then she reached for the gavel. "Big mistake. You can't override us," she shouted. "This is still my meeting." Wyatt leaned in, voice low but lethal. "You try to gavel me out, Karen. But turns out I own the gavel." That's when the door opened behind him, and in stepped the county sheriff. Boots dusted, badge gleaming, and in his hand, a stack of eviction notices, each one stamped, signed, and sealed by the same district judge who once fined Karen for trying to sue the town's 4th of July committee. The room froze. Karen stood there, mouth open, gavel midair, like she was about to swear in her own downfall. Wyatt didn't even look back. He just pulled a chair, sat down at the head of the table, and said, "Meeting's now in session." And the sheriff, he just smiled and handed Karen her papers. "Next part's going to sting. You ready?" It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a full-blown rodeo. With Karen tied to the bull and Wyatt holding the gate, he filed a complaint like he was branding cattle. Precise, permanent, and a little painful to watch. Fraudulent annexation, forged signatures, improper notice filings, willful land theft, misuse of HOA funds, and just for fun, property conversion. Legal speak for, "You stole my ranch and now you're going to pay through the teeth." Karen naturally did what Karen does best. She ran to the local media, sobbing on camera in front of her stucco palace about being terrorized by rural aggression. She called it a hostile land grab by a bitter cowboy who doesn't understand community spirit. Community spirit? This from a woman who once fined a 9-year-old for unauthorized sidewalk chalk. Meanwhile, Wyatt's legal team was stacking evidence like hay bales in a barn. One exhibit stood out, a video clip from a HOA Zoom meeting someone accidentally recorded. It showed Karen, glass of boxed wine in hand, smirking into the camera and saying the words that would follow her forever. "Let's fine him till he breaks." The courtroom was packed the day the trial began, press, neighbors, even two YouTubers, with a channel called HOA Nightmares, Real or Rewritten. Wyatt sat calmly in a tailored jacket that still somehow smelled faintly like horse sweat and justice. Karen strutted in with a new haircut, a fresh spray tan, and a face that screamed, "I practiced crying in the mirror." But the judge wasn't buying the performance. He combed through the documents like a rancher inspecting fence lines. When Wyatt's lawyer presented the 1910 Granger Covenant, the one filed by Wyatt's great-granddad, in ink older than Karen's entire personality, the whole courtroom leaned forward like the floor had just tilted. The judge squinted at the yellowed parchment, adjusted his glasses, and asked, "This is verified, stamped, sealed, and recorded," Harlan replied, cool as iced bourbon. "It contains a reversionary clause that nullifies any subdivision not authorized by blood descendants." Karen's lawyer paled. You could practically hear the gears grinding in his head. The judge sat back, silent for a long moment, tapping his pen on the bench. Then he looked up at Karen, looked at the HOA's entire table of sweat-slicked board members, then back at Wyatt, and said 5 words that flipped the entire room inside out. "This changes everything. Case reopened." Oh, yeah. Now it was about to get good. You ready for the fallout? The gavel didn't just fall, it detonated. In a ruling that read more like a country ballad than a court order, the judge declared the entire Willowgate HOA fraudulently constituted, improperly enforced, and legally void. Effective immediately, all actions taken under its authority were nullified. Every lien, gone. Every fine, erased. And every inch of land wrongfully seized to be returned. But that was just the appetizer. The main course, each board member was held personally liable for damages. Not, the HOA as an entity, not their insurance, them. Karen Mitchell, HOA queen turned courtroom cautionary tale, had 30 days to vacate the oversized stucco shrine she once called future-proof real estate. That very house, sitting on land tied to Wyatt's great-granddaddy's covenant, was never hers to begin with. Now, she was legally a trespasser, with very expensive taste and nowhere to store it. The neighbors watched from their porches like it was free TV. Karen tried to keep it classy, but class ran out the moment the U-Haul backed into her circular driveway and she had to load her Pilates machine next to a stack of Live Lock Love signs. She barked orders at 2 movers who looked like they were being paid in tears and guilt. One of them accidentally dropped her world's best organizer mug. It shattered like her reputation. The cherry on top? A drone video shot by a local teen showing Karen carrying her designer lamps down the front steps while her little dog barked from inside the truck. The footage hit TikTok with the caption, "She used to fine people for fence height. Now she couldn't afford a gate." Todd Granger, the HOA vice president who once fined a man for mismatched lawn chairs, tried to claim bankruptcy. The court didn't buy it. His triple garage suburban stronghold was listed and repossessed within weeks. Rumor had it he moved in with his cousin in Bakersfield. Not even his smoker grill survived the financial wildfire. As for the HOA clubhouse, the crown jewel of their beige-papered regime, Wyatt now owned it outright. Every folding chair, every passive-aggressive bulletin board, even the espresso machine they used to deny non-board members. And that brings us to the moment. Wyatt stepped into the now empty meeting hall, boots echoing on tile, sun pouring through the dusty blinds. In one hand, he held the original HOA sign, Willowgate Community Center, a proud HOA neighborhood. He dropped it onto the floor with a satisfied metal clang, like dropping the mic after a victory speech written in blood, sweat, and legal precedent. From under his arm, he pulled out a new sign, oak-framed, freshly carved, oiled, and bold. He mounted it right above the fireplace, secured it with 2 screws and a twist of the wrist that felt like justice turning a key. It read, "Freedom Ranch, no HOA allowed." And just as he stepped back to admire it, boots planted, hat tipped low, a shadow passed behind him. Someone had seen it. and they were not happy. The first thing Wyatt did with the old HOA clubhouse, after hanging his Freedom Ranch sign like a Declaration of Independence, was bulldoze the parking restriction sign right into the trash. Then he walked out, took one long breath of the wide, regulation-free air, and started planning something this town hadn't seen in years, a future that didn't come with a warning letter. Within a week, the Willowgate Community Center was reborn as the Freedom Green, an open-air park with shaded benches, a dog run, a fire pit, and a homemade swing set built from repurposed lumber and stubborn optimism. Kids laughed, dogs barked, someone even grilled sausages on what used to be the CHOA's barbecue. But now, nobody measured the grill height or complained about the seasoning. Wyatt wasn't just reclaiming land, he was rebuilding a neighborhood. One fence mended, one porch unjudged. He fixed up old homes that had been slapped with fines for non-standard shutters and helped repaint the house that Karen once called a visual offense to suburban aesthetics. He replaced the mailbox Karen once had measured with a tape measure and deemed 1.3 inches too expressive. He called it art now. But the biggest change, the Granger Co-op. No bylaws, no board, no clipboard warriors, just neighbor pitching in, lending tools, swapping eggs, hosting pancake breakfasts where nobody got fined for maple syrup on the sidewalk. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was human. And Wyatt, he was the reluctant mayor of this new frontier, leading with a hammer in one hand and a pie recipe in the other. One afternoon, a young couple in a hatchback pulled up, the kind with car seats in the back and dreams bigger than their down payment. They looked nervous. She clutched a folded flyer. He held a leash that led to a confused duck in a baby harness. "Hi, we're the Bowens," the man said, clearing his throat. "We just bought that yellow house on the corner. We were told—" "This used to be an HOA?" Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "Used to be. We just want to raise a few ducks, not too many, maybe 6, but we weren't sure if, that was allowed." Wyatt took a sip of sweet tea, looked down at the duck and grinned. "As long as your ducks knock before coming over, we're good." The woman laughed. The duck quacked. The man looked like he'd just been unburdened of 1,000 invisible forms and inspections. They moved in that weekend. The ducks came too. Someone painted them a little "Welcome to the Coop" sign. Wyatt made sure it was exactly 47% non-regulation, just for fun. And so life rolled on. The fences stayed up, but the walls came down. People planted gardens in front yards that once had to be turf green and soulless. One guy installed a giant gnome in his lawn and named it Councilman Sprout. Nobody complained. In fact, they added sunglasses to him every morning. Freedom was messy, but it was real. Then one crisp morning, just before fall settled in, Wyatt checked the mail and found a small, flat package. No return address, just his name, handwritten in ink that wobbled a little, like the person had been second-guessing every stroke. Inside was a wooden plaque. Not new, not clean, but familiar. The old HOA sign, Willowgate Community Hall. Taped to the back was a sticky note. "Only 5 words, you were right." Okay. Wyatt stared at it for a long while, the wind rustling through the prairie like the land itself had paused to listen. He didn't smile, he didn't curse, he just whispered, "Took you long enough." But deep down, something shifted. Because even the harshest soil can grow something new if you finally stop choking it with rules. And he hadn't seen the last of Karen yet. 1 year to the day since the court gave him back what was never really lost, Wyatt Granger sat on his porch with a tin cup of coffee in hand, and a weather-worn dog snored at his boots. The air had that late summer scent, half dust, half wildflower. And somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower purred without oversight, unmonitored, gloriously uneven. Freedom had a sound. It was that. Granger Fields had grown from a punchline into a living, breathing thing. The houses still looked like suburban clones, but now they wore their differences like war paint. One neighbor painted their garage door into a Texas flag. Another installed a windmill that squeaked when it got excited. And nobody gave a damn. What used to be the HOA clubhouse was now a multi-purpose barn with a chili cook-off schedule pinned next to a lost and found corkboard, currently featuring 2 unmatched crocks, 1 chicken, photo only, and a mysterious left-hand gardening glove. But the real centerpiece was the old brick wall at the edge of the property, once the proud foundation of HOA bureaucracy, now a canvas of poetic justice. It had taken 3 weekends, 6 gallons of paint, and a retired high school art teacher named Joan with a vendetta against beige, but the mural was done. Bold, wild strokes across faded red brick. Wyatt, drawn like some Wild West folk hero, rode a painted horse across a backdrop of rolling prairie. In his hand wasn't a lasso or a rifle, it was a map, his map, the one that proved the land had never belonged to them. And beneath it, in fat letters the color of prairie fire, it read, "Earned, not stolen." People took selfies with it. One kid asked if Wyatt was a sheriff. Another called him the cowboy lawyer. He let him believe what they wanted. The truth was messier and a hell of a lot more fun. Every once in a while, someone would drive through, real slow, looking around like they were trying to find a violation to report. They'd pause at the front gate, stare at the new wooden sign carved by hand and hung crooked on purpose, then drive off in silence. That sign was Wyatt's last word on the whole damn saga. Welcome to Granger Fields. No dues, no drama, just dirt and dreams. That evening, someone lit a grill 3 doors down, kids ran barefoot through sprinklers, someone blasted Johnny Cash from a porch speaker loud enough to make the dogs howl in harmony. It was chaotic, it was loud, it was imperfect, and it was home. Wyatt leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking like it always did before it gave up completely. He looked out over the hills, the ones Karen once tried to turn into golf courses, and smiled, because this wasn't just a win, it was a resurrection. They had tried to kill something old and stubborn with forms and fees and phony power, but you can't kill something that grew from the earth. You can't outvote history. You can fake a title, you can fake power, but you can't fake roots. And this land, it wasn't just his anymore, it was theirs. Here's the thing, this story ain't just about land. It's about what happens when you stand your ground, even when the world tries to pave over it with rules, fees, and fake authority. Wyatt didn't win because he had lawyers or money. He won because he had grit, receipts, and a long memory. In a world where people worship paperwork over principle, this reminds us, don't be afraid to fight slow. Play the long game. Be petty and precise, and never underestimate a guy with a survey map and a grudge. If this story hit home, or made you laugh, cheer, or maybe rethink your HOA, drop a comment below. Hit that like button. Share it with your rebellious uncle, and tell us, what's your Freedom Feels moment? Thanks for watching, and remember, the best revenge isn't loud, it's legal. See you on the porch, just knock first.